folks, Scott here with the new My Monthly Hero June 2023 kit. I've got both the classic and the premium here. Of course, they always come in this 8x10 zippered envelope pouch. And this is our backer card. Let's take a look at what we get in our classic kit. It looks like we're going to the seashore, to the beach, with shells and sand and sunsets and the seashore. A perfect place to be in June. Our classic kit contains a 6x8-inch stamp set. This is featuring this great Hero Escape layering stamp, which this stamp and this stamp and this stamp will do the water with the highlights right in the center. There's a sun, there's a half sun, clouds. We've got a number of silhouettes, a big orca whale, there are extra clouds, a dog, a couple of kids, a dock, some balancing stones. Only a few sentiments. Hello, friend, sending you an ocean of thanks. Embrace the sun. Clear stamp set, 6x8 inches. We get 14 coordinating dies with that. That will cut out everything, including, this is a cloud die to cut out the clouds. This is the edge of the ocean die. This also has this great fancy window die. Looks like a couple of palm trees, a lot of greenery. There's our sun, there's the pelican, and one of the kids, the dog, I think you can, oh, and there's even a couple of sentiment dies. These go on the big sentiments, I believe. May every sunset bring you peace, and oh, and here's the one for sending you an ocean of thanks. So those two big ones have dies for them. That's 14 coordinating dies and a beach window fancy die. We get 6 sheets of watercolor cardstock, 8.5 by 5.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is really nice, really good Hero Arts watercolor cardstock. And then we get 4 reactive ink cubes, splash, taffy, creamsicle, lemon drop, perfect for creating sunsets and oceans. Really nice. That's everything in our classic kit. And then for the premium kit, you get this special layering stencil that is seashells. Who is it, Sue? Is it Sue that sells seashells by the seashore? Big 6x6-inch layering stencil. Here's our big one. We get into more detail and then even more detail with that last one. Of course, you can use those as a background, or you can cut those shells out to use individually. They're all easy to cut out. And we also get some enamel stickers. These are beautiful. There's a little green, a little blue. This is kind of a gray C dot, and these are called C dot enamel stickers. And Bahama Bliss sequins. But this not only has flat sequins in it, it looks like it actually has dimensional sequins. It looks like there's some real gems in here as well. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And then some new iridescent embossing powder. You can see that iridescent clinging to the side of the pot there. Iridescent embossing powder. That's everything in our My Monthly Hero June 2023 classic and premium kit. So let's go recharge our positive ions at the seashore. And here we have our 10 cards for the month, all on white card bases. No fancy sizes or anything. Of course, when you're working with those Heroscapes stamps, they're kind of set specifically to a certain size of card. They're 4 1/4 inches wide. So I will once again work on making 5 cards using just the classic kit, and then 5 more adding in the premium supplies as well. Now, the ink cubes included in the kit are reactive inks, which means they react with water, and we got a bunch of watercolor paper in our kit too. It seems like we're being encouraged to use those inks on watercolor paper. So for my first card, we've got a May every sunset bring you peace. On a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of watercolor paper, I stamped the largest water stamp using Splash Reactive ink. Then I stamped the second ripple stamp using Blue Hawaii Reactive ink. Now, I had to stamp both of those multiple times to get a decent impression. Those are almost, especially that first stamp, is almost just a solid stamp. I still had some deep textures from the watercolor cardstock that weren't capturing the ink. I did a light ink blending in the sky with the Splash ink, and I stamped the clouds using the Blue Hawaii. I stamped the sun and the small ripple stamp using Lemon Drop and the Creamsicle Reactive inks, and added the extra smaller clouds using the Splash ink again. Finally, I ink blended some antique linen distress oxide ink on the bottom for our sandy beach here. That's all of the inks used here. Now, once everything was stamped, I still had some white texture spots from the watercolor paper that just wouldn't ink up. Well, so I figured I'd break out some water and a paintbrush, and that's just what this needed. I was able to blend away all of the texture spots that were resisting the inks. I added a little more color where the sea meets the sand. I got some nice striations in the sky, and I de-emphasized those stark outlines on the big cloud stamp. This feels almost a little painterly to me. I also used some iridescent watercolor ink. This is from My Monthly Hero Kit, October of 2016. Get that. Iridescent watercolor ink. I used some of that on the sun and its reflection to add a touch of glitter. I'm not sure if you can see that. I can see it. And I also drew a thin white line to actually emphasize the horizon line. I added the birds with some granite core ink. I trimmed the panel down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches and added a thin white matte and then a dark blue pearlescent matte, and glued all of those to a white A2 card base. Now, I stamped our little silhouette down here 3 or 4 times using intense black ink. Then I let that dry overnight and came back the next day and stamped it 2 more times with the same ink. That just about completely erases the ripple lines that she stamped on top of. Now, I wasn't sure where I was going to put this sentiment, so I stamped and embossed it on a piece of vellum using the Blue Hawaii ink and clear embossing powder. I die cut the sentiment using the matching die, and finally decided to center the sentiment on the sun. So I ran that die cut through a Xyron sticker maker and stuck it down right into place. Well, this card took an awful lot of time with my fiddling around and experimenting with the kit, but I really like the finished card. I'm not too sure about this sentiment. I mean, you may just be sending peaceful thoughts to someone at the end of their day, but this does kind of feel like a bereavement card to me. The sun breaking through the clouds and a glimmer of hope on the horizon. May every sunset bring you peace. Okay, enough with that watercolor cardstock. Let's see how these stamps behave on some plain old-fashioned cardstock. So our next card is Embrace the Sun. This is on a panel of Staples ivory cardstock, Plano Staples ivory cardstock. I stamped the big water stamp in sections, Splash and Blue Hawaii and the taffy, to get a little more color on the water, a little more sun reflection on the water. I used a blending brush to pull some of that color up into the sky as well, and I ink blended some Lemon Drop ink on the top part of that panel for the sky. I stamped and embossed the second ripple stamp using embossing and watermark ink and clear embossing powder. There you go, you can see that. That gives us some nice shine on the water. I stamped the setting sun, or is that a rising sun? with Lemon Drop and Creamsicle inks, and I used the same inks on the small ripple stamp and embossed that with more clear embossing powder. So I die cut the beach window fancy die from some of the watercolor paper. I'm sure I had some grand ideas about painting it and discovered that the next to the largest oval infinity die actually fits the oval of our window die and just a little bit larger, so you could cut it out and make a nice little frame with that. I was very pleased with that. I die cut the inked ivory panel with the same oval die and glued both pieces together and then down to a white card base. And using my Misty stamp platform, I curved the sentiment to match the oval, stamped it with intense black ink, and embossed it with some clear embossing powder. I like the sentiment outside of the frame. No competition with the beachy scene inside of that oval. And I really like that window die. A good amount of detail without being overly fussy. It works quite nicely in simple white. It adds great detail and texture to this card while not drawing focus from our ocean scenery. So let's try something like this, but with a night sky instead. That round sun stamp could just as easily be a moon, correct? And here we have our next card. It's sending you an ocean of thanks. Nice nighttime card there. Look at that. So on a panel of pitch black cardstock, I stamped the large ocean stamp with Hero Art's unicorn white pigment ink and let that dry thoroughly before stamping it again with blue Hawaii reactive ink. So this is white, the unicorn white ink on some black cardstock. Keep your stamp in the same place and then stamp a color on top of that. That's how I can get some nice color on black cardstock. So I turned to some perfect pearls for the second ripple stamp, inking that with the perfect medium ink and using the perfect pearl powder on top. That's a nice pearlescent reflection without sparkles. I stamped the moon and the small ripple stamp with embossing and watermark ink and embossed those with white sparkle embossing powder. This is from the October of 2020 kit. White sparkle embossing powder. Lots of great glitter and a nice white color as well. I stamped the clouds upside down on the top of the panel with some unicorn white ink and used a white gel pen to add just the smallest sprinkling of stars in the sky. I cut a panel of this dark blue pearlescent cardstock to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches and die cut the window die from the center of that. I trimmed down the stamp panel to match, glued them both together, and then down to a white card base. I stamped the sentiment on a scrap of the pearlescent cardstock with unicorn white ink and embossed that with white embossing powder. I die cut the sentiment with the matching die and glued it to the card front. It kind of feels like an extension of the moon's reflection in the water. I love it when we get sentiment dies in our kit. Now, our stamp set does have all sorts of people and items to populate our seashore, but I felt like the window die kind of limited the space where we could add those images. So I thought I'd skip some of the items in our stamp set to help me make a more complete scene. And here we have a Seize the Day card. Really nice scene here with a old, tired, but true pun of Seize the Day. So I took a panel of Hero Hues Arctic cardstock and I stamped the second ripple stamp with unicorn white ink. I also stamped the clouds in the same ink upside down again on top of the panel. I ink blended some antique linen distress oxide ink on the bottom of the panel for our beach, just leaving the line between the water and the beach a little vague. I stamped the lighthouse with granite core ink and the dock with charcoal core ink and the kids and the dog with intense black ink. I got some nice reflections in the water by stamping the dock and the lighthouse lightly on a piece of acetate, flipping that over, turning it around, and pressing the ink down underneath the original stamping. Nice water reflections on both of those. I stamped the sun in the sky and its reflections with lemon drop ink and added some of the bird footprints going along in different directions down in the lower left corner. I printed this punny sentiment using my Silhouette software and the Blackjack and DIN condensed fonts. So the Blackjack is the script, DIN condensed is the block printing. I felt like this is a pretty good approximation of the sentiment fonts in the stamp set. Now I used some of my Pebbles chalk pastels for the dark mist on the horizon, and some micro brushes with frayed burlap distress oxide ink for the shadows on the kids. Some white gel pen adds more foamy white water where the sea and the shore meets. I trimmed this paddle down just a little bit, glued to a white card base. I really like the soft colors here, as well as the reflections and the shadows. Very serene. Seize the day. Now, these Heroscape stamps are obviously intended to be used on an A2 card in a portrait orientation. They are all 4 1/4 inches wide. Well, you know me, I'm not happy unless I can figure out a way to use those stamps in a landscape orientation. So card number 5 here is, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Miss you. A nice little miss you card. The landscape orientation really makes the water or the ocean or the lake or whatever it is look much more expansive. On a panel of white cardstock, I stamped the big stamp using splash reactive ink. I masked off the sky and ink blended more of the same ink on the sides to extend that stamping to 5 1/2 inches wide. I stamped the second ripple stamp with embossing and watermark ink, extended that stamp to the edges with an emboss it pen, and embossed all with glacial blue embossing powder. Now this was also from the My Monthly Hero October 2020 kit. I always thought that as the water got farther away from you, it should get lighter and not darker. So I thought this was a great find to this nice light blue embossing powder. The smallest ripple stamp is embossed again with a white sparkle embossing powder. I think you can see plenty of shine there, a little sparkle in the reflection. So I flipped my masking around to ink blend the sky using Blue Hawaii, Purple Galaxy, and Licorice reactive inks. I spattered the stars with some white India ink and blended a little moon halo with some unicorn white ink. I die cut the moon from white cardstock using the included die and ink blended it with charcoal and granite core inks. A tiny little round blending brush gives us some nice craters and dimensions on that moon. I trimmed that panel to 3 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, added a thin dark pearlescent matte top and bottom, and went to work on my sentiment. Now, I printed this sentiment directly on a white card base using my Silhouette software and the Dream State font. Now this is the ending lyrics to that old standby, I'll Be Seeing You. You know that song, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. That was a big hit for Bing Crosby in 1944 after being featured in the Ginger Rogers and Joseph Cotton movie, I'll Be Seeing You, that same year. Now, it seems like just about everybody has made a recording of this song, from Billie Holiday to Michael Bublé. I think Rosemary Clooney's is my favorite. Later, this song became notably associated with Liberace as the theme music to his television show of the 1950s. So this is, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Miss you. Love this card quite a lot. So that feels like a pretty good exploration of all of the items in our classic kit. So let's move on to that premium kit and these fun layering stencils. Now, since we have Splash, Lemon Drop, and Taffy inks in this kit, I thought a rainbow card was a good start. I blended stencil A with the large openings using only the 3 inks, and I got a great green and a nice orange with the ink blending. I used antique linen distress oxide ink for stencil B, the outline stencil, and I couldn't resist doing some foiling with stencil C. I used the Decofoil transfer gel through the C stencil, let that dry, ran it through my laminator with the Gina K gold sequins foil. This came out so nice, I almost couldn't bring myself to cut it. I even considered making a 6x6 inch card, maybe even a mini slimline card, but ultimately I had to return to my standard A2 card format, and we have Celebrate. That's another pun for you there. And look at the foiling on that card. I just love it. I cut the stencil down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I glued it to a thin metallic gold mat and then down to a white card base. I created this sentiment, really nice pun, using my Silhouette software. I printed it on white cardstock and cut it out along with 4 blanks using my Silhouette portrait. I glued all 5 layers together for a dimensional chipboard feel, and I added some sparkle highlights on that sentiment using my Jelly Roll a Stardust glitter pen. I am loving this. I don't know if the video is giving justice to this foiling. It's really just gorgeous in life. This whole card just shines. Looks like a party waiting to happen. Celebrate! Okay, so rainbow seashells are not necessarily accurate. So I thought I'd try a more realistic color palette for these stenciled shells. And we've got another Celebrate card, but this one says, Happy Birthday. Oh, I like this one almost as much as the rainbow shells. This is very beachy. On a plain panel of Staples Ivory cardstock, I used antique linen distress oxide ink for stencil A, the large openings, frayed burlap distress oxide ink for stencil B, the outlines, and aged mahogany distress oxide ink for stencil C. Of course, I couldn't leave well enough alone, and I added some hero paste glitter over the ink on stencil C. It took that ink color just beautifully and added a nice touch of sparkle as well. Once that glitter paste was dry, I trimmed the panel to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, added a metallic rose gold mat, and glued those to a white card base. Now, I did like that Celebrate sentiment so much, I created this Dijon yellow version. I printed, cut, and glued 5 layers as I did previously, and I even added the glitter highlights as well. Now, we do have this Happy Birthday sentiment in our kit. It turned out to fit just perfectly under the right side of this sentiment. A perfect card for anyone celebrating a birthday on the beach. I did add some clear sequins from our Bahama Bliss sequin mix for a little extra sparkle. That glitter paste really adds a great texture to this card as well. Celebrate! Happy birthday! Now, we only have 5 sentiments in this stamp set, so I was looking forward to coming up with some puns of my own. There's a pun there, a little pun there. And my next pun is keep calm and carry on. Thank you, Great Britain. I really do like that fancy window die. And since the palm trees are quite prominent, I decided that this was a good pun for a straightforward and fairly simple card. I cut the window die from some green pearlescent cardstock in my stash, printed the sentiment on a piece of Hero Hues Arctic cardstock using the Hiragino Sans W7 font. Printed that on the Arctic cardstock and then ink blended splash ink around the edges. I glued those 2 pieces together and then down to a white card base. I did manage to fussy cut 3 complete shells from my original rainbow panel and added to the bottom of the oval with foam tape. Those add a nice pop of color and shine, and they really anchor that window die on the bottom of this card. Some crystals and sequins from the Bahama Bliss sequin mix add a nice finishing touch, and lots of sparkle keep calm and carry on. I did manage to get 2 more partial shells out of that original inking, but I think I used up that whole panel pretty well. I didn't let any of it go to waste. I'll probably hang on to these. I don't know. This one's worth saving. Maybe not this one. So I feel like I've shortchanged the beach window fancy die just a little bit. So I thought I'd give it some extra attention with this next card. And of course, we get another fun pun. And here we have, don't worry, beach happy. I can't help myself sometimes. I die cut the window die from a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of Bristol smooth cardstock and colored everything with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. On another panel of ivory cardstock, I masked off a horizon line and used the splash ink to blend in the water below the masking. I stamped the second ripple stamp with embossing and watermark ink and embossed it with the glacial blue embossing powder again. You can see the shine there. I stamped the sun and the reflection ripples with lemon drop ink and embossed the ripples with the iridescent embossing powder that was included in this kit. That's very interesting embossing powder. As you can see, when you move it around in the light, it changes color. There's yellow, and there you can see it goes right to blue. Very interesting effect in real life. I'm surprised that the camera's actually picking it up. I also stamped the leading edge of the big water stamp, where the water meets the beach, with embossing ink, and embossed that with some white sparkle embossing powder. That gives us a little foamy water where the waves crash on the shore. I stamped the sailboat on a scrap of ivory cardstock using the granite core ink, and I die cut it with the matching die. I stamped the pelican directly on the colored panel with the same ink. I think I stamped that twice just to make it a tiny bit darker than that sailboat. I trimmed the die cut border on the sailboat and glued it in place so you can see the sailors between the 2 palm leaves. I added thin strips of foam tape behind the free-floating branches of the palm trees. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's none behind this one. And a little on the top of their trunks, and then glued the rest of the oval frame down to my inked panel. I printed this sentiment on a scrap of ivory cardstock using my Silhouette software and the DIN condensed font. I do love this pun. Don't worry, beach happy. I die cut the sentiment with a Lawn Fawn Everyday Messages banner die, mounted it to the card front with foam tape that again really anchors that window die perfectly. I enjoyed coloring this window die. There's not much else to color in this kit, but you do need to be careful that your background doesn't compete with your colored die cut, or you're going to lose it completely. Don't worry, beach happy. Okay, and here we are with my last card. Now, this isn't a pun, but it is a good play on words. When I saw the obvious orca whale stamp, I knew what I wanted to do, and we have a Killer Day card featuring our Orca Killer whale. So I stamped the orca in position on a panel of white cardstock using intense black ink. I stamped and fussy cut a mask for the whale at the same time. I placed the mask over the whale and then a circle mask, sun mask, on top of that. There's my mask still sitting there. And then I masked off the horizon line and ink blended blue Hawaii below the horizon mask. Then I masked off the water, flipped that mask around, and ink blended the sky with lemon drop ink. Blue and yellow, of course, are great complements to each other. I removed all the masks, and I'm left with a great little vignette featuring our killer whale. Have a killer day. I die cut the inked panel with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die that's 4 1/2 inches by 3 1/4 inches. And I printed this great sentiment using my Silhouette software and the Dream State, and again, the DIN condensed fonts. I glued that down to a black mat and then to a white card base. This is very straightforward, but quite impressive, just using that Orca stamp and some simple masking. I love it. Have a killer day. And that completes my 10 cards, 1 kit post inspired by the My Monthly Hero June 2023 kits. Well, I've got quite a nice variety of cards and looks this month. I almost used every stamp in this stamp set. I didn't get to the Cairns stamps, these little stacked rocks, and I didn't use the Hello Friend sentiment, but every other stamp is on the cards. The Beach Window Fancy die is terrific, either plain or colored. The seashell layering stencils are simply gorgeous and can be ink blended in an infinite variety of colors. The water rippling layering stamps work brilliantly. I feel like I kind of need to get to the seashore as soon as possible. Now, everybody must be yearning for the beach these days, as both the classic and the premium kits have sold out already. Hopefully, I've been able to give you a few different takes on ways you could use this kit, and maybe I even inspired some ideas of your own. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me here today. Your support and encouragement mean everything to me. Let me know which cards are your favorites, so remember to like me, list me, pin me, post me, share me with all of your friends. Beware of sea urchins and jellyfish. And as always, I'm sending you and yours all my love and light, and happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.